There are moments in your life that arrive disguised as something ordinary. They don't announce themselves with thunder or a flash of lightning. They slip in quietly, wearing the camouflage of a Tuesday night, a shared pizza, the low hum of a television playing a movie neither of you is watching. And you only recognize their weight in retrospect, when you trace the fault lines of your own personal history back to that single, silent, tectonic shift. For me, that moment had a name, and a scent like clean laundry and the faint, citrusy tang of the shampoo he used, and it had the specific, solid weight of his head resting on my shoulder. It was the moment I stopped breathing, convinced that even the whisper of air from my lungs could shatter the fragile architecture of the truce I had built around my own heart. He was asleep. Liam. His breath was a slow, even tide against the fabric of my t-shirt, a rhythm that seemed to sync with the frantic, terrified drumming in my own chest. On the screen, a car chase I couldn't follow careened through a city I didn't recognize. The only geography that mattered was the 6 inches of space he occupied, the way the dark sweep of his hair tickled the bare skin of my neck, the subtle pressure of his arm pressed against mine on the worn corduroy of my couch. This was a space fraught with peril, a no-man's land I had spent years carefully navigating. Friendship with Liam was a country with strict border controls, and I was its most vigilant guard, because the contraband I was hiding was the simple, ruinous truth. I was in love with him. Every instinct screamed at me to move, to shift, just an inch, to gently dislodge him and guide his head to a cushion. It would be the kind, sensible, friendly thing to do. It would be safe. It would maintain the established boundaries, the unspoken rules that had allowed me to keep him in my life for the better part of a decade. But my body was a traitor, a statue carved from lead and longing. My muscles refused the command, locked in place by a force far more powerful than logic. It was a desperate, hopeless gravity, the kind a lonely moon might feel for its planet, forever circling but never allowed to touch down. To stay, to let him sleep right there, was to admit something. It was to let the contraband slip past the gates, to let the truth breathe the same air as the lie I had been living. And in the flickering blue light of the television, with the sound of his quiet breathing filling the world, I made a choice. I chose to stay. I chose to not breathe. I chose to let this quiet, ordinary moment become the most significant thing that had ever happened to me. To understand the weight of that choice, you have to understand the foundation it was built upon. Liam and I were a study in contrasts, an unlikely pairing that had somehow clicked into place during our first year of university. We'd both been on the track team, but even there, our orbits were different. He was a sprinter, all explosive power and dazzling, short-lived brilliance. His races were over in a flash of muscle and speed, leaving the crowd breathless. I was a long-distance runner. My world was one of endurance, of pacing, of finding a rhythm and holding it for miles. I didn't dazzle. I persisted. Liam collected medals and attention, his smile easy and bright enough to power the stadium lights. I collected blisters and the quiet satisfaction of pushing my body past its perceived limits in the lonely pre-dawn hours. Our friendship wasn't forged in the heat of competition, but in the quiet aftermath. It was born in the physical therapy room, where we were both nursing shin splints, our legs submerged in identical tubs of ice water, the cold so sharp it was a kind of heat. He'd started talking first, of course. Liam was a talker. He filled silences the way nature abhors a vacuum. He talked about his classes, his frustration with his coach, a girl he'd met at a party. I mostly listened, offering a quiet nod here, a short question there. I was a photographer even then, an observer by nature, more comfortable behind a lens than in the center of the frame. I studied people the way I studied light, and Liam was a fascinating subject. He was all bright surfaces and kinetic energy, but I could see the subtle shadows, the flicker of anxiety in his eyes when he thought no one was looking, the way he'd drum his fingers on his knee when he was wrestling with a problem. That first conversation, teeth chattering from the ice, turned into another. We started grabbing food after practice, our shared exhaustion a common language. We became study partners. His mind, so quick and logical, perfect for the software engineering degree he was pursuing, was a fascinating counterpoint to my own, which wandered through abstractions and compositions of light and shadow. He would patiently explain complex algorithms to me, drawing diagrams on napkins, and I would help him see the narrative in a dense piece of literature, finding the human story buried in the academic text. We fit. Our pieces, so different in shape and texture, somehow locked together to form a more complete whole. The falling happened gradually, then all at once. It wasn't a single moment, but 1,000 tiny ones. It was the way he'd look for me in a crowd after a race, his face breaking into that brilliant smile when our eyes met. It was the time he showed up at my dorm room with a tub of soup when I had the flu, sitting on the edge of my bed and reading aloud from a textbook until I fell asleep. It was the unguarded moments, late at night in the library, when the confident athlete would vanish, replaced by a young man terrified of failing, of not living up to the expectations everyone seemed to have for him. In those moments, he would look at me with a raw vulnerability that cracked my own carefully constructed defenses. I started to see him not just as a friend, but as a constellation of fears and hopes that I felt a desperate, protective urge to shelter. I hid it, of course. I buried it so deep I could almost convince myself it wasn't there. He started dating Sarah in our sophomore year, a bright, kind political science major who was his perfect counterpart. They looked good together, the kind of couple you'd see in a university prospectus. I became the third point of their triangle, the steadfast best friend. I went to their parties, I helped him pick out her birthday presents, I listened to him talk about their future. Each word was a small, sharp paper cut on my heart, but I learned to smile through it. To be his friend was a privilege I wasn't willing to risk for a feeling he could never return. My love was a secret language I spoke only to myself, a photograph I kept developing in the darkroom of my mind, but never dared to bring into the light. The architecture of our friendship was built on the lie of my platonic affection, and I became its most meticulous, paranoid architect. For years, the structure held. The first crack in that foundation appeared on a rainy Thursday in October, nearly 8 years after we'd first met. My phone rang just after midnight. It was Liam, his voice thick and strange. He wasn't drunk, he was hollowed out. "She's gone," he said, and there was no preamble, no greeting. Just those 2 words, dropped into the silence of my apartment like stones into a deep well. I knew who she was. Sarah. They had been together since we were 19. They had an apartment together, a shared Netflix account, a ficus plant they were slowly killing. They had a future, sketched out and agreed upon. Marriage, a mortgage, a golden retriever. It was a life I had watched them build, brick by painful brick. "What do you mean, gone?" I asked, already pulling on a pair of jeans. She packed her things. Said she wasn't happy. "Hasn't been happy for a year," he said, his voice cracking on the last word. "A year, Ethan. She waited a year to tell me. I didn't ask if he needed me to come over. I just went. I found him sitting on the floor of his now half-empty living room, surrounded by the ghosts of a shared life. A blank space on the wall where a painting used to hang. The indentation in the carpet where her bookshelf had been. He was staring at a single, abandoned coffee mug on the table, as if it held all the answers. He didn't look sad, not in the way I expected. He looked bewildered, like a man who had woken up from a long dream to find himself in a foreign country with no map and no memory of how he got there. He wasn't just mourning the loss of Sarah, he was mourning the loss of the blueprint. I didn't say much. There was nothing to say. I just sat on the floor with him, a silent presence in the wreckage. I made coffee he didn't drink. I ordered a pizza he didn't eat. We sat there until the sun came up, the gray morning light filtering through the blinds, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the empty spaces. It was in that moment that something shifted, something fundamental in the gravitational pull between us. He was unmoored, and without thinking, he had reached for me. I was his anchor, the one fixed point in his collapsing universe. And I, who had spent years carefully managing the distance between us, found myself wanting nothing more than to pull him in closer, to let his ship wreck against my shore. It was a dangerous, selfish thought, and I pushed it down, burying it under layers of practiced, platonic concern. That night was the beginning of the ritual. He couldn't stand to be in his apartment. He said the silence was too loud, the emptiness too vast. So he started spending his evenings at my place. It was easy, natural. We'd order takeout, watch old movies, talk about everything and nothing. It felt like a return to our university days, a regression to a simpler, safer time. But it was different. There was a new fragility to him, a new neediness that he tried to hide under a thin veneer of bravado. I saw it in the way he'd let the silence stretch, waiting for me to fill it, the way his eyes would sometimes get a distant, haunted look. The first time he stayed over, it was almost an accident. We'd been drinking cheap whiskey and talking late into the night. He'd told me stories about his childhood I'd never heard before, painting a picture of a lonely kid who used sports as a shield. It was the most vulnerable I'd ever seen him. When he finally stood up to leave, he swayed slightly, the whiskey and emotional exhaustion hitting him all at once. "You shouldn't drive," I said, my voice firmer than I felt. He just nodded, a weary, grateful look on his face. "Yeah, couch is okay." Of course, I gave him a blanket and a pillow, and the act felt both mundane and monumental. I retreated to my bedroom, closing the door behind me, and leaned against it, my heart pounding a frantic, irregular rhythm. He was sleeping in my apartment. Just a thin wall and 20 feet of hallway separated us. It was too close. It was not close enough. I lay awake for hours, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of another person breathing in my space. Every creak of the floorboards, every soft sigh from the living room, was magnified in the darkness. I was a cartographer mapping a new and dangerous territory, and every sound was a landmark on the path to my own undoing. The couch became his regular spot. He'd arrive after work, his laptop bag slung over his shoulder, looking tired and drained. My apartment, a small, quiet space filled with books and camera equipment and the smell of darkroom chemicals, became his sanctuary. He never explicitly asked to stay. It just became the unspoken assumption. Around 11, I would get him the blanket and pillow, and he would murmur his thanks, and I would retreat to my room and my sleepless, vigilant nights. This new routine was a form of exquisite torture. I was hyper-aware of him, of his presence. I learned the pattern of his breathing as he slept, the way he'd sometimes mutter in his dreams. I could tell what kind of day he'd had by the set of his shoulders when he walked through my door. I was an astronomer who had discovered a new planet in my own solar system, and I spent my nights obsessively charting its course, cataloging its features, knowing all the while that I could never, ever land on it. The hope was the most painful part. It was a tiny, persistent green weed pushing its way through the concrete of my resolve. I would watch him sleep, his face relaxed and boyish in the dim light from the street, and I would have to physically restrain myself from reaching out, from smoothing the hair back from his forehead. The proximity was a constant, low-grade fever, and I was burning from the inside out. The ritual escalated on a cold night in late November. A storm was raging outside, the wind howling and rattling the window frames. Liam was curled on the couch under his usual blanket, but he was shivering, a deep, bone-rattling chill that had nothing to do with the temperature in the room. I'd watched him for half an hour, his body tense, his sleep troubled. Finally, I couldn't stand it anymore. I went to my linen closet and pulled out the heavy down comforter from my own bed. I knelt by the couch. "Liam," I whispered. He stirred, his eyes fluttering open, confused and unfocused. "Ethan, what's up?" "You're freezing," I said, my voice barely audible over the wind. "The couch is drafty. Just, come on." I didn't give him a chance to argue. I helped him up, and he was pliant, half asleep, leaning on me as I guided him down the short hallway to my bedroom. The room felt charged, sacred ground he had never entered before. My bed, a simple queen frame with a gray duvet, suddenly seemed enormous, an ocean of terrifying possibility. "You don't have to," he mumbled, but he was already crawling under the covers I held open for him. "Just sleep," I said. I made a show of grabbing my own pillow and a spare blanket. "I'll take the couch." "No," the word was soft, but firm. He was more awake now, his eyes clear and fixed on me. "Don't be ridiculous. It's a big bed. Just stay on your side, stay on your side." It was a boundary line drawn down the middle of the mattress, an invisible wall. It was permission, and it was a warning. My mind screamed at me to refuse, to retreat to the safety of the couch, to the established order of things. But my body, that constant traitor, was already moving. I turned off the light, plunging the room into a darkness broken only by the faint glow of the street lights through the blinds. I slid into the bed on the far side, keeping a careful, calculated distance between us. The mattress dipped with my weight, a subtle shift that felt like a seismic event. I lay there, rigid, my back to him. I could feel the heat radiating from his body across the small gulf of cotton sheets. I could hear his breathing, closer now, a real and present sound right behind me. This was a new level of intimacy, a new and far more dangerous phase of our ritual. The plausible deniability was wearing thin. This wasn't just a friend crashing on a couch. This was something else, something unnamed and undefined, and it terrified me more than anything ever had. He didn't move. He just breathed. And after a long, long time, his breathing deepened into the slow, steady rhythm of sleep. Only then did I allow myself to relax, just a fraction. I didn't sleep that night. I listened. I listened to the storm outside, and I listened to the storm inside, and I listened to the quiet, steady presence of the man sleeping in my bed, and I wondered how long a heart could beat this fast before it simply gave out. That night became the new normal. He never went back to the couch. He would just head to my room when he was tired, a silent, mutual understanding passing between us. The pretense of the drafty couch or the cold night was gone. The reason was simpler and more terrifying. He just wanted to not be alone. And I, for reasons I refused to articulate even to myself, couldn't say no. We were two lonely people sharing a space, a small island of warmth in the vast, cold ocean of the night. We became experts in the art of unspoken communication. We developed a choreography of nearness. The invisible wall down the middle of the bed remained, but its borders became more porous. Sometimes, in the night, a hand would stray across the line, a foot would brush against another. These moments were electric, charged with a meaning I was desperate to decipher. Was it an accident? A subconscious reach for comfort? Or was it a question? Each touch was a Rorschach test, and I saw in it whatever my hopeful, terrified heart wanted to see. I would lie awake after one of these accidental touches, my skin tingling, my mind racing, dissecting the moment from every possible angle. It was like trying to develop a photograph with uncertain chemicals, watching the image emerge, blurry and indistinct, praying it would resolve into the picture I so desperately wanted to see. I photographed him, not with my camera, but with my memory. I captured the way the morning light would catch the stubble on his jaw, the way his brow would furrow in sleep when he was dreaming, the peaceful, unguarded expression on his face that no one else ever got to see. These images were for my private collection, stored in the most secure vault of my mind. They were precious and dangerous, proof of a closeness that I couldn't define and didn't dare to name. I was living in a state of suspended animation, a breath held for weeks on end. I was terrified of the moment it would all come crashing down, when the sun would rise one morning and he would realize what was happening, what I was feeling, and the quiet sanctuary we had built would be shattered forever. The crossing happened on a night that was utterly unremarkable. There was no storm, no whiskey, no dramatic confession. It was just a Tuesday. We had eaten dinner, watched some meaningless television, and then, as we had done for weeks, we had gone to bed. For a long time, there was only the familiar silence, the sound of our breathing in the dark. I was on my side, he was on his. The invisible wall was firmly in place. Then he moved. He rolled over to face me. I could feel the shift in the mattress, feel his presence beside me, closer than usual. I kept my own back to him, my eyes squeezed shut, pretending to be asleep. My heart was a frantic bird beating against the cage of my ribs. This felt different. The air was thick with something new, a tension that was more than the usual hum of unspoken things. Ethan, his voice was a whisper, a tentative sound that barely disturbed the quiet of the room. I held my breath. I could pretend I hadn't heard, let the moment pass, retreat back to the safety of our established ritual. But I was so tired of being safe. I was so tired of the silence. I rolled over slowly to face him. In the dim light filtering through the blinds, I could just make out the shape of his face, the dark pools of his eyes. He was so close. I could feel the warmth of his breath on my cheek. Yeah, I whispered back, my own voice rough with disuse and fear. He didn't say anything for a long time. He just looked at me. It was a look I had never seen from him before. It was stripped of all the usual easy confidence, all the friendly bravado. It was uncertain and questioning and profoundly vulnerable. It was the look of a man standing on the edge of a cliff, trying to decide if he should jump. And then he asked the question that dismantled the world I had so carefully constructed. Would it be okay, he started, his voice so quiet it was almost lost in the space between us. He swallowed, a small, audible sound. Would it be okay if I kissed you? Time stopped. The sound of the city outside faded away. The only thing that existed was his question, hanging in the air like a perfect, fragile glass sculpture. It was everything I had ever wanted to hear, and everything I had been terrified of. It was a key, offering to unlock a door I had long ago bolted from the inside. All I had to do was let him turn it. I couldn't find the words. My throat was tight, my mind a blank canvas. So I just nodded. A single, small, jerky movement. It was enough. He moved slowly, tentatively, giving me every opportunity to pull away, to stop him. But I was frozen, not with fear anymore, but with a kind of reverent disbelief. His hand came up to cup my jaw, his thumb stroking softly against my skin. The touch was gentle, questioning. And then his lips met mine. It wasn't a passionate kiss, not like in the movies. There was no fire, no desperate claiming. It was soft and hesitant and deeply uncertain. It was a question asked in a different language. It was a confession. It tasted of doubt and of fragile, burgeoning hope. It lasted only a few seconds, but it stretched into an eternity. When he pulled back, he didn't move away. He just rested his forehead against mine, our breath mingling in the small space between us. And we stayed like that, in the quiet darkness, for a very, very long time. The wall had come down. The ritual was broken, and I had no idea what would be left in the rubble. The morning after was a study in silence. A new kind of silence. Not the comfortable, companionable quiet we had shared for years, nor the tense, charged silence of the nights in my bed. This was a hollow, anxious void. I woke up slowly, drifting into consciousness with a sense of warmth and contentment I hadn't felt in years. For a fleeting, blissful moment, I forgot. I stretched, my hand reaching across the bed for the warmth that had been beside me. My fingers met only cold, empty sheets. My eyes snapped open. The other side of the bed was empty, the pillow indented where his head had been, the covers thrown back in a way that suggested a hasty departure. A sliver of gray morning light cut through the blinds, illuminating the room in stark, unforgiving detail. He was gone. He had left before I woke up, slipping away like a thief in the night, taking the fragile hope of the darkness with him. A cold dread, familiar and sickening, washed over me. I had been a fool. I had misinterpreted everything. The kiss wasn't a beginning, it was a mistake. A moment of lonely, post-breakup confusion on his part that I, in my pathetic yearning, had inflated into something more. I had broken the cardinal rule. I had let him see the contraband, and now he had run, terrified, leaving me to deal with the wreckage of our friendship. I lay there for a long time, staring at the ceiling, cataloging my stupidity. The memory of the kiss, which had felt so real and momentous just hours before, now seemed like a dream, something my own desperate imagination had conjured. I felt a profound sense of shame. He had come to me for comfort, for a safe harbor, and I had turned it into something complicated and messy. I had made it about me. I went through the motions of the day in a fog. I showered. I made coffee I didn't drink. I sat in front of my computer, staring at a collection of photos I was supposed to be editing, but the images were just meaningless shapes and colors. My apartment, which had become our shared sanctuary, now felt like a crime scene. His presence lingered everywhere, the blanket folded neatly on the arm of the couch, his coffee mug next to the sink, the faint scent of his shampoo on my pillow. Each trace of him was a fresh accusation. I sent him a text around noon, trying to sound casual, breezy, like the guy whose best friend hadn't confessed something life-altering with a kiss just a few hours earlier. Hey, you forgot your mug. It was a pathetic attempt, a transparent plea for contact. I stared at my phone, watching the 3 little dots appear and disappear as he typed a reply, my heart hammering against my ribs. The dots vanished. No reply came. He had started to write something and then stopped. The silence that followed was more damning than any angry words could have been. The rest of the day crawled by, each minute an exercise in anxiety. He didn't come over after work. The knock on my door that had become the punctuation mark to my day never came. The silence in my apartment was absolute, deafening. The emptiness he had been trying to escape in his own home had now migrated to mine. 2 more days passed in this new, agonizing limbo. My texts went unanswered. My calls went straight to voicemail. He was avoiding me. He was erasing me. The fear curdled into a slow, burning anger. Anger at him for being a coward, for leaving me to dangle in this awful uncertainty. And anger at myself, for letting one moment of weakness jeopardize the most important relationship in my life. I had survived for years on the scraps of his platonic affection. I had convinced myself it was enough. Now, having tasted something more, I was starving, and the emptiness was unbearable. On the third night, I couldn't take it anymore. The not knowing was worse than any possible rejection. I needed to hear the words. I needed him to look me in the eye and tell me it was a mistake so I could begin the long, painful process of rebuilding my walls, higher and stronger this time. I put on my jacket, my hands shaking as I fumbled with the zipper, and walked the 6 blocks to his apartment. The lights were on. I could see his silhouette moving behind the drawn curtains. He was home. He was just a few feet away, living in a world that no longer included me. I stood on the sidewalk for a long time, the cold night air biting at my cheeks, trying to muster the courage to go up. This was it. This was the conversation that would either salvage some broken piece of our friendship or shatter it completely. I finally forced myself to walk up the steps and press the buzzer for his apartment. The sound echoed in the quiet entryway, loud and accusatory. For a long moment, there was no response. I was about to turn and leave, to accept the silent rejection, when the speaker crackled to life. "Hello." His voice was hesitant, wary. "It's me," I said, my own voice sounding thin and unfamiliar. "We need to talk." Another long pause. I could picture him on the other end, his eyes closed, his hand gripping the receiver. I could feel his indecision, his fear. Finally, the lock buzzed, a harsh, electric sound that felt like a surrender. His apartment was immaculately clean, a stark contrast to the emotional chaos of the last time I was here. It looked sterile, impersonal, like a hotel room. He stood in the middle of the living room, not looking at me, his arms crossed over his chest in a defensive posture. He was wearing a faded university sweatshirt, and he looked younger and more lost than I had ever seen him. The silence stretched, thick and uncomfortable. I was the one who had forced this confrontation, so it was up to me to speak first. "So are you just going to avoid me forever?" I asked, and the words came out sharper, more wounded than I intended. He finally looked at me, and his eyes were full of a miserable cocktail of guilt and confusion. I didn't know what to say. "You could have said anything, Liam." I shot back, my frustration boiling over. "You could have said it was a mistake. You could have said you were drunk, or lonely, or that you regret it. But you said nothing. You just disappeared. After everything, you just left me in my apartment wondering if I had imagined the whole thing. Do you have any idea what that feels like?" He flinched, as if I had physically struck him. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his gaze dropping to the floor. "Ethan, I'm so sorry. I don't want your apology," I said, my voice breaking despite my best efforts to keep it steady. "I want to understand. What was that? The other night? What was that for you?" He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of pure distress. He started pacing the small living room, a caged animal. "I don't know," he said, the words torn out of him. "I honestly don't know," and that was it. That was the moment my heart, which had been holding on by a thread, finally snapped. All the hope, all the years of silent pining, all the anxiety and the longing, it all collapsed under the weight of those 3 simple, devastating words. "I don't know. You don't know." I repeated, the words flat, devoid of emotion. I felt a strange, cold calm settle over me. It was the calm of resignation, the quiet that comes after the storm has passed and leveled everything in its path. "You kiss me like that. You look at me like that, and you don't know." I turned to leave. I couldn't be in that room anymore. I couldn't look at him. I had my answer. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't regret. It was worse. It was nothing. It was a void. To him, I was just a moment of confusion, a temporary solution to his loneliness. "Ethan, wait." His voice was urgent, desperate. He moved to stand between me and the door, blocking my exit. "Please, don't go." "Why?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "So you can keep not knowing? I can't do this, Liam. I can't live in the gray area anymore. I've been living there for years, and I'm done. I need you to be honest. If it was a mistake, just say it. I'm a big boy. I can take it. It will hurt like hell, but I'll take it. But what I can't take is this. This, nothing, Tears were welling in his eyes, and the sight of them shocked me into silence. I had seen Liam cry exactly once before, when his grandmother died. He was not a crier. He was the one who held it together. But now, his composure was completely gone. It wasn't a mistake, he said, his voice thick. That's the problem. It didn't feel like a mistake. It felt more real than anything has felt in a very long time. And that scares the hell out of me. He took a shaky breath, the confession tumbling out of him now, a torrent held back for too long. All those nights, at your place, I wasn't just running from the silence here. I was running to the quiet there. With you. I could breathe when I was with you. And when I was lying there, next to you in the dark, it was the only time my brain would shut up. It was the only time I felt safe. He looked at me, his eyes pleading. I've spent my whole life following a plan, Ethan. University, job, Sarah, marriage, it was all laid out. I never had to think about what I actually wanted. I just did what was expected. And now, the plan is gone. And I'm lost. And the only thing that feels like a real direction, the only thing that feels like solid ground, is you. And I don't understand it. I've never felt this way about a guy before. About anyone, really. Not like this. It's not part of the plan. He finally said the words that had been echoing in the room since I'd arrived, the words that I had repeated back to him with such bitterness. He said he didn't know what this was, but this time, they sounded different. They weren't an excuse. They were a confession of fear, of a profound, terrifying confusion. He wasn't dismissing what had happened. He was admitting he was too scared to comprehend it. My anger evaporated, replaced by a wave of empathy so strong it almost buckled my knees. I saw him then, not as the source of my pain, but as someone who was in just as much turmoil as I was, if not more. I had had years to come to terms with my feelings for him. He was being hit with a decade of emotion in the span of a few weeks. Of course he was scared. Of course he was confused. The silence that fell between us now was different again. It was a space of raw, shared vulnerability. The cold calm inside me began to thaw, replaced by a fragile, tentative warmth. He took a hesitant step closer, his hands still clenched at his sides. He looked like he was asking for permission. Then he asked if I'd help him figure it out together. The question was quiet, almost a whisper. I don't know what this is, he repeated, his eyes locked on mine. But I want to. I want to know. But I can't do it alone. I'm too scared to do it alone. Will you? Will you help me figure it out? Together? It was the bravest thing I had ever heard him say. It was an admission of weakness and a profound declaration of trust. He wasn't offering me certainty. He wasn't promising a neat and tidy resolution. He was offering me the truth. He was offering me his confusion, his fear, his fragile, terrifying hope. He was offering me the chance to build something new with him, from the ground up, without a blueprint. In that moment, I knew I had a choice. I could retreat to the safety of my anger and my hurt, demanding the certainty he couldn't give me. Or I could take the hand he was, metaphorically, holding out. I could step into the unknown with him. I took a deep breath, the first real, full breath I felt like I had taken in 3 days. Okay, I said, and the single word was a promise. Okay, Liam. Together, the relief that washed over his face was so profound it was like watching the sun break through the clouds after a long storm. The tension in his shoulders eased, and he let out a shuddering breath he seemed to have been holding for days. He didn't rush towards me, didn't try to kiss me again. Instead, he just stood there, looking at me with a gratitude so deep it made my own eyes burn. We had crossed a new threshold, not into a relationship, not yet, but into a space of shared intention. The ambiguity was still there, but it was no longer a weapon of avoidance. It was a question we had both agreed to answer. We didn't talk much more that night. The emotional exhaustion was too heavy in the room, but the silence was once again transformed. It was a comfortable, healing quiet. He made tea, and we sat on his couch, a careful but not unkind distance between us, sipping from our mugs. It was a truce, a fragile peace treaty signed after a long and painful war. When I finally stood up to leave, he walked me to the door. Will I see you tomorrow? He asked, the question tentative, hopeful. Yeah, I said, a small smile touching my lips for the first time. My place. After work, he nodded, a matching smile finally reaching his own eyes. Okay. Walking back to my apartment, the cold night air felt different. It was crisp and clean, full of possibility. I wasn't walking back to a crime scene anymore. I was walking back to a construction site. We had leveled the old, compromised structure of our friendship. Now, we had to see what we could build in its place. The days that followed were a slow, careful process of discovery. We were learning a new language together, one where touch and proximity had different meanings. Liam came over the next night, as promised. And when it grew late, a new, unspoken question hung in the air. He looked from the couch to the hallway leading to my bedroom, a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. I decided then that I would not be a passive observer anymore. I was a part of this, an equal partner in the navigation. "You can stay," I said, my voice quiet but steady. "If you wanna," he just nodded, a silent, grateful acceptance. That night in my bed was different from all the nights that had come before. The invisible wall was gone, but we didn't rush to fill the space. We lay on our respective sides, but the distance felt comfortable, intentional. It wasn't a space of fear, but one of respect. Before we turned out the light, he rolled onto his side to face me. "Thank you," he whispered into the darkness. "For not giving up on me, never," I whispered back. We started to build new rituals. We held hands. It happened for the first time while we were walking to get groceries, a week after our talk. His hand brushed against mine, and instead of pulling away, he hesitated. I saw the debate in his eyes. So I made the choice for both of us. I gently linked my fingers with his. His hand was warm and solid in mine. He looked down at our joined hands, then up at me, a slow, wondering smile spreading across his face. It felt right. It felt solid. It felt like coming home. We talked. We really talked, for the first time, about the things we had spent years avoiding. He told me about the pressure he'd always felt to be the person everyone expected him to be, the star athlete, the successful engineer, the perfect boyfriend. He admitted that his relationship with Sarah had felt more like a partnership in a business venture than a romance for the last few years, a comfortable habit he was too afraid to break. He was discovering his own feelings as he was speaking them aloud, like an explorer narrating his journey into a new and unknown continent. I, in turn, told him about the years of hiding, about the carefully constructed walls I had built around my heart. I told him about the loneliness of loving someone in secret. I didn't tell him to make him feel guilty, but to make him understand the landscape I was coming from. It was a process of mapping our own internal worlds for each other, laying all our fears and histories out on the table. It was terrifying, and it was liberating. The physical intimacy grew as organically as our emotional honesty. Kisses were no longer fraught with confusion. They were gentle affirmations, quiet conversations. They happened at the front door before he left for work, or in the middle of making dinner, a simple, warm pressure of lips that said, "I'm here. I'm still here." I'm not running. One afternoon, I was in my darkroom, the small, windowless space that had always been my private sanctuary. The red safe light cast an eerie glow on everything, and the sharp, vinegary smell of stop bath hung in the air. I was watching an image of a winter landscape slowly emerge in the tray of developer, a magical, gradual process of creation. The door creaked open, letting in a sliver of white light before it was quickly closed again. Liam stood there, his form a dark silhouette against the door. "Sorry," he whispered. "Didn't mean to interrupt." "You're not," I said, my eyes still on the photograph. "Come in." He came to stand beside me, watching the image resolve in the chemical bath. He was silent for a long time, just observing the process. "This is what it feels like," he said finally, his voice soft with wonder. "With us, it feels like this. Like something's been there all along, in the dark, and now it's finally starting to become clear." I looked at him then, and in the strange, crimson light of the darkroom, I could see the truth of his words reflected in his eyes. The confusion was gone, replaced by a quiet certainty. He wasn't scared anymore. He was just watching, waiting with a patient curiosity to see the final image. That night, as we lay in bed, he didn't stay on his side. He shifted closer, his arm sliding around my waist, and pulled me against his chest. He buried his face in my hair, his breath warm against my neck. My body, which had spent so many nights rigid with tension in this very bed, melted into his embrace. There was no hesitation, no uncertainty. It was a simple, declarative act of belonging. I felt his heartbeat, slow and steady against my back, a rhythm that was no longer a source of anxiety, but the deepest comfort I had ever known. For the first time, I fell asleep before he did. We never put a formal label on it. We never had a big conversation where we defined ourselves as boyfriends. We didn't need to. The words felt clumsy and inadequate for what we were building. What we had was quieter, more profound. It was in the way he started leaving a toothbrush in my bathroom, the way my books started appearing on his nightstand. It was in the easy, domestic rhythm we fell into, making coffee in the morning, texting each other mundane details about our day, falling asleep in each other's arms at night. The door to my bedroom was no longer a boundary to be navigated. It was simply the door to our room. We were healing. We were healing the wounds we had carried separately for years, and the new ones we had inflicted on each other during our period of conflict. We were building a new foundation, not on a pre-written blueprint of expectations, but on a shared commitment to honesty and patience. We were figuring it out, day by day, moment by moment, together. Sometimes, in the quiet moments, I think back to that first night, the one disguised as an ordinary Tuesday, when his head fell asleep on my shoulder. I think about the terror and the longing, the war between my instinct to protect myself and my desire to let him in. It's strange to realize that the most important decision of your life can be a passive one. The simple choice to not move, to stay, to endure the discomfort of vulnerability in the hope that it might lead to something beautiful. It's in those quiet, unannounced moments that our real lives are shaped, not by grand gestures, but by the subtle shifts in our own internal geography. He didn't know what it was, and in the beginning, neither did I. We only knew it felt like coming home. And so we began to build that home together, in the beautiful, honest silence we had finally learned how to share.